Officer Daniel Riker entered the courtroom not like a man facing charges, but like a king returning to territory he believed belonged to him. His boots struck the polished floor with confident rhythmic thuds, loud enough to draw eyes, soft enough to signal he controlled the pace of the room. The badge on his chest gleamed brilliantly beneath the overhead lights, as if it were a weapon he intended to use long before any evidence or testimony began. The audience sensed it instantly. Something was off. A police officer wasn't supposed to enter a courtroom with smirks and swagger. Courtrooms demanded humility. Riker brought the opposite. Judge Caprio, already seated, lifted his gaze slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't frown. He simply observed, watching how Riker scanned the room, how he ignored the bailiff's gesture toward the defendant's table, and how he deliberately placed his hands on his hips like a man preparing to give orders rather than receive judgment. The silence carried weight. Heavy. Predictive. Caprio didn't need gavel strikes. He commanded the room with stillness. Riker broke it. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Some of us actually do real work." The prosecutor, Elaine Porter, shot him a sharp look. She had prepared for resistance, but not for the smugness radiating from every muscle in his body. "Officer Riker," she said sharply, "please take your seat." Riker lifted one eyebrow. "I'll sit when I'm ready." The disrespect hung in the air like smoke. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. A few bystanders exchanged glances, half confused, half amused, like they were watching a man unknowingly walk toward a cliff's edge. Caprio finally spoke. "Officer Riker," he said, voice calm as a still ocean, "this is a courtroom, not a locker room. Kindly sit." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was a reminder, subtle, powerful, that ego had no jurisdiction here. Riker let out a quiet, dismissive scoff. But he sat. His chair screeched harshly against the floor, mirroring his attitude. The bailiff stiffened beside him. Elaine Porter opened her folder with tight, controlled motions. Even the court stenographer paused briefly, sensing this case would become one of those rare ones she'd remember years later. Caprio folded his hands. "Officer Riker, you are here today regarding allegations of misconduct during a traffic stop. You will be given every opportunity to present your side of the story. But I expect respect and composure inside this courtroom." "Understood." Riker leaned back, stretching one arm over the back of his chair. "I understand perfectly, Judge. But let's not pretend I'm some criminal. I enforce the law. This entire hearing is a waste of taxpayer time." Gasps fluttered through the audience. Caprio didn't react, not visibly. But in his eyes, a spark flickered. The kind that appeared when someone pushed a boundary too far. Elaine leaned forward. "Officer Riker, no one is accusing you of being a criminal." Riker cut her off. "Oh, please. You're accusing me of doing my job." He gestured around the room. "This whole court knows that." Caprio lifted one hand, and the room fell quiet. "Officer Riker," he said, "the purpose of this hearing is not what you believe it is. You're not here to educate us about the law." Riker smirked. "I probably know it better than anyone in this room." The statement punched the air out of the courtroom. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet. Elaine froze mid-page turn. The bailiff blinked in disbelief. The gallery leaned forward as if magnetized by the arrogance unfolding before them. Caprio's expression didn't change, but the room felt it. A shift. A sharpening of tension that promised consequences. "Officer Riker," Caprio said slowly, "you may want to be very careful with what you choose to say next." Riker folded his arms and replied, "I'm not afraid of this court." The gallery inhaled sharply. And just like that, the battle truly began. The courtroom had barely recovered from Riker's bold declaration when Prosecutor Elaine Porter rose from her seat. She adjusted her blazer, inhaled deeply, and opened the case file with a slow, deliberate movement, one meant to reset the mood of the room. But Officer Riker ruined that instantly. He leaned back in his chair, twirling his pen between his fingers with casual defiance. The badge clipped to his chest seemed to shine even brighter now, as though arrogance itself had polished it. Elaine cleared her throat. "Your Honor, Today, the prosecution will demonstrate that Officer Daniel Riker engaged in misconduct during a routine traffic stop on the evening of June 4th. Riker smirked at the word misconduct, his eyes rolling with theatrical exaggeration. Someone in the gallery exhaled sharply, sensing immediate disrespect. Elaine continued, "The officer detained a civilian for over 40 minutes without proper justification, used threatening language." "Threatening," Riker muttered, tapping the table loudly. "She was hysterical." "Officer Riker," Caprio said, his voice calm but cutting, "you will remain silent until spoken to." Riker lifted both hands in fake surrender. "Sure, Judge. Whatever you say." The sarcasm dripped like acid. Elaine shot him a glance before proceeding. The civilian reported feeling unsafe and intimidated. She stated that Officer Riker used his authority not to enforce the law, but to exert power. Riker chuckled, an actual laugh, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "Authority is power. That's the whole job." The gallery stirred again. A woman in the front row shook her head. A man whispered, "This guy's unbelievable." Caprio's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Elaine continued flipping pages as she narrated the events, her tone steady but edged with disbelief. According to the report, Officer Riker repeatedly delayed letting the woman go, questioned her without cause, and made remarks that suggested she should remember who protects this city. Riker tilted his head, a smug smile creeping across his face. "I stand by that. She was disrespectful." Elaine closed the folder slowly. "Your Honor, the prosecution will show that what Officer Riker considers disrespect is actually a civilian exercising her rights." Riker scoffed loudly. "Civilians think they're lawyers now. Everyone's a legal expert until something goes wrong." Caprio finally leaned forward, folding his hands. "Officer Riker, is there any reason you believe civilians shouldn't understand their rights?" Riker shrugged. "Most of them don't. Especially not her." The pause after her carried weight, disrespectful, dismissive, suggestive. Elaine stiffened. "Would you mind clarifying what you meant by that?" "No," Riker said, smirking. "Because it's obvious." The room chilled. Body language spoke louder than his words. The tilt of his chin, the narrowing of his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to show dominance. Elaine pressed on. "The question before this court is not whether civilians know the law, it's whether you followed it." Riker leaned back again, crossing his arms with triumph. "I followed my judgment. That's what we're trained to do." "No," Caprio corrected softly. "You're trained to follow the law." A sudden hush fell. Caprio rarely corrected with such precision. Riker's smile faded just slightly, just enough for Elaine to notice. She seized it. "Your Honor, we intend to call the victim to the stand. But before that, the court must understand the mindset Officer Riker held during the incident." She turned to him. "Officer, do you regret anything about that night?" Riker answered instantly. "Not a thing." Elaine stepped closer. "Not even the fear you caused her?" Riker let out a short, sharp laugh. "She was scared? Good. Maybe she'll think twice next time before mouthing off to an officer." The courtroom froze. A gasp. A whisper. A hand quickly covering a shocked mouth. Caprio didn't move, but his expression darkened, not with anger, but disappointment. Deep, heavy disappointment. Riker felt the shift but misunderstood it. He smirked again, thinking he'd won the moment. Elaine stared at him, stunned. "Officer Riker, do you even hear yourself?" He shrugged. "Truth hurts." Caprio's fingers tapped the bench once. It was the first outward sign of something changing. "Officer Riker," Caprio said quietly, "the victim will now be called, and I strongly suggest you prepare yourself." Riker smirked, unbothered. And then the courtroom doors opened, revealing the victim with trembling hands and eyes still carrying fear. Riker smiled at her. That smile is what silenced the entire courtroom, and what would soon become his biggest mistake. The victim's hands trembled as she took the stand. Her voice was soft, cautious, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping threat. "My name is Clara Jensen," she said, fingers clutching the edge of the witness box. "And that night, I honestly thought I wasn't going to be allowed to leave." Riker exhaled sharply, shaking his head with a mocking grin. The sound sliced through the room, disrespect masked as boredom. Clara's eyes flicked toward him, fear resurfacing instantly. Judge Caprio noticed. "Officer Riker," Caprio said, calm but colder than before, "you will refrain from reacting during testimony." Riker spread his arms. "I'm just listening." But he wasn't. His eyes gleamed with a calculated superiority, as if Clara's trembling was an inconvenience to him rather than the result of his behavior. Clara continued. "He kept asking me the same questions again and again. He said I looked nervous, but I only got nervous because he wouldn't let me go." Riker scoffed. "You were nervous because you were hiding something." Elaine shot up. "Objection, Your Honor." Caprio didn't bother raising his hand. Sustained. "Officer Riker, another interruption and we will treat it as contempt." Riker leaned forward, fingers drumming on the table. "So she gets to say anything she wants, and I'm supposed to stay silent?" "That," Caprio answered smoothly, "is how testimony works." A murmur of laughter sparked in the gallery, but died instantly as Riker's gaze swept across the room, cold and venomous. Clara swallowed. "He told me, you don't want to make me angry tonight." Riker slammed his palm on the table. "That is not what I said." Clara jumped. The bailiff took a step forward. Caprio's eyes hardened. "Officer Riker, sit back and keep your voice down." Riker stood. "I have every right to defend myself when lies are being told." Elaine stepped in. "Your Honor, the witness should be allowed to speak without intimidation." "Intimidation?" Riker barked, pointing at Clara. "She's playing victim. She was disrespectful from the moment." Caprio's voice sliced the air. "Officer Riker, sit down." The courtroom held its breath. Riker hesitated, then slowly lowered himself, jaw tight, nostrils flaring, eyes burning with defiance. Clara resumed softly, "I just wanted to go home. But he kept circling my car, looking inside, questioning me about things that had nothing to do with why he pulled me over." "That's called police work," Riker muttered. Elaine turned sharply. "Your Honor." Caprio raised his hand. "Enough." His voice no longer held calm neutrality, it carried weight. "Officer Riker, you will only speak when permitted." Riker leaned back, eyes narrowing. "I have the right to correct misinformation." Caprio stared down at him. "You have the right to be heard. You do not have the right to disrupt this court." Riker's lips curled into a smirk, arrogance sharpening into something dangerous. "I know the law better than you, Judge." Silence. Deep, suffocating silence. Even the lights seemed to flicker in disbelief. Elaine froze mid-step. The bailiff glanced at Caprio as if bracing for impact. Clara covered her mouth with both hands, trembling. Caprio didn't react immediately. He simply looked at Riker, long enough for the room to feel the pressure rising, like air being compressed before an explosion. "Officer Riker," Caprio said finally, voice low, "I advise you to reconsider your words." Riker shrugged, a confident roll of his shoulders. "I'm not reconsidering anything. I enforce the law. I live the law. I know it better than anyone in this room, including you." The temperature of the room seemed to drop a full degree. Elaine whispered, "Oh my God!" Caprio leaned forward slightly. "If you believe your badge places you above the law, then we have a far more serious problem than this hearing." Riker's smile widened. "No, Judge. The problem is that you people think you understand what we face out there. We're the front line. We make tough calls. And we don't need lectures from someone who's never wrestled a suspect at 2 in the morning." Caprio's eyes darkened, not with anger, but disappointment powerful enough to silence the room. He spoke quietly. "You may continue down this path, Officer Riker. But I promise you, it will not end where you think." Riker chuckled, shaking his head. And then, Clara suddenly rose from the stand, tears in her eyes. "Judge Caprio, may I show the court the recording?" The courtroom gasped. Riker's smirk vanished. Caprio nodded slowly. "Yes, Ms. Jensen. Present the recording." Clara reached into her purse, and Riker whispered, barely audible, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." The room exploded with anticipation, and the first crack in Riker's confidence appeared. Clara Jensen sat in the witness stand with the kind of posture you only see in people who have spent weeks gathering courage just to speak. Her shoulders were stiff, her hands twisted nervously in her lap, and her breaths came unevenly, as though each inhale was a fight against a memory she didn't want to relive. Judge Caprio offered her a reassuring nod. "Take your time, Ms. Jensen." Riker, however, did not. He leaned back, one arm casually draped over his chair, jaw shifting with an exaggerated yawn, broadcasting to the entire courtroom that her testimony was not worth his attention. Clara opened her purse and removed her phone, placing it gently on the ledge before looking at the judge. "Your Honor, I'm still scared of him." A few soft gasps came from the gallery. Riker smirked. "You're scared of everything." Elaine immediately turned toward him. "Officer Riker, enough." Riker raised his eyebrows as though the reaction amused him. "Just stating a fact." Clara swallowed hard, voice trembling. "That night, I was driving home from a late shift. I work at the hospital. I was exhausted, and I didn't see the light turn yellow as I went through." She paused, her fingers gripping the wooden edge of the stand. Riker chuckled, quiet but cruel. Clara's lips pressed together. "He pulled me over. I wasn't rude. I wasn't disrespectful. I handed over everything he asked for. But then he kept asking questions, personal ones. Things like where I lived, who I lived with, what time I usually got off work." "It's called conversation," Riker said without looking at her. Clara's voice cracked. "It wasn't a conversation. It was interrogation." Riker laughed, this time loud enough to echo. The courtroom froze. Elaine stared at him in disbelief. "Your Honor, the witness is being mocked during her testimony." Caprio's jaw clenched. "Officer Riker, this is your final warning." Riker shrugged. "If she's going to dramatize things, I reserve the right to react." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't dramatizing anything. You frightened me." Riker leaned forward. "Lady, I've seen real fear. Yours. That was nothing." A ripple of disgust moved through the courtroom. People shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, others covering their mouths in disbelief. Clara wiped her cheek. "He kept me there for 40 minutes. He circled my car 3 times. He told me, 'I can keep you here all night if I want.'" Riker snorted. "And look, you weren't there all night. So what's the issue?" Clara's hands trembled harder. Elaine stepped closer to the bench. "Ms. Jensen, did the officer ever state why he needed to continue detaining you?" "No," Clara whispered. "And when I asked if I could leave, he looked at me and said." She stopped. Her breath hitched. Judge Caprio's voice softened. "You're safe here, Ms. Jensen." "Say it." Clara looked directly at Riker. He said, "People like you don't get to question officers like me." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Riker rolled his eyes as if the statement were trivial. Then he laughed again. Louder. Mocking. Almost triumphant. Caprio's gaze sharpened with a cold intensity that made the room still. "Officer Riker," he said slowly, "I strongly suggest you control yourself." Riker wiped an imaginary tear from his eye. "Sorry, Judge. This whole thing is ridiculous." Clara's hands moved toward her phone. She picked it up with shaky fingers. "Your Honor," she whispered, "there's something else." Riker's laughter stopped instantly. She unlocked her phone. "I didn't want to show this. I was scared to. But after hearing him today, I have to." Elaine's eyes widened. "Ms. Jensen, what is it?" Clara held the phone up. "It's a recording," she said. "I recorded part of the stop when I realized something was wrong." The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. Riker's face drained of color, not completely, but enough for the shift to be unmistakable. For the first time since he entered the courtroom, he didn't look amused. Caprio leaned forward. "Ms. Jensen," he said quietly, "please hand the recording to the bailiff." As the bailiff approached, Riker whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Damn it!" Every head in the courtroom turned toward him, and the balance of power, for the first time, began to break. The courtroom felt strangely hollow that morning, quiet, but not peaceful. It was the type of silence that fills the air before a storm breaks. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered like they were unsure whether they wanted to witness what would happen next. Officer Dalton entered through the side door, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, eyes set straight ahead. Gone was the arrogant smirk he wore during the last hearing. Today, he walked as if he were carrying something heavy, something invisible but unmistakably real. Judge Caprio sat at the bench, hands folded, gaze lowered. Not a word, not a nod, not even a flicker of emotion crossed his face as the officer approached his table. The silence was sharp. Dalton cleared his throat, trying to cut through it. "Your Honor, I'm here as instructed." "Nothing." Caprio didn't look at him. The officer shifted, uncomfortable. I'm ready for the continuation of the hearing." Still nothing. For the first time since the case began, Dalton looked unsure. Finally, the judge lifted his eyes, but his expression wasn't anger, wasn't frustration. It was something far heavier. Disappointment. "Let's proceed," Judge Caprio said quietly. The softness of his tone made the words hit harder than any outburst could have. "Bring in the witness." All heads turned as the elderly veteran, Mr. Hawkins, was escorted to the stand. His limp was more pronounced today, and he gripped the rail as he sat down. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were resolute. Caprio nodded to the clerk. "Please raise your right hand." After the oath, the judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hawkins, in your own words, tell us what happened that night." The veteran exhaled shakily. "I was crossing the street after my shift, the late shift. I heard someone shouting. I didn't respond. Then I felt someone grab my shoulder. Hard." His voice trembled. "When I turned around, I saw Officer Dalton. I told him I was on my way home. He accused me of ignoring him." The courtroom turned toward Dalton. His face tightened, but he didn't speak. Hawkins continued. "When I told him I had a hearing problem because of combat service, he laughed. Said I was pretending." A wave of discomfort rolled through the room. Dalton opened his mouth to object, but Caprio lifted his hand. A simple gesture. Quiet but absolute. Dalton's jaw snapped shut. Judge Caprio looked back to Hawkins. "Did Officer Dalton strike you?" The veteran swallowed. "He shoved me. Hard enough that I fell. My cane broke." A murmur rippled through the benches. Dalton couldn't stay silent any longer. "Your Honor, with respect, I didn't shove him. He lost balance." Caprio turned his head slowly toward him. No words. Just a look. A look that said, "Choose your next sentence carefully." Dalton stiffened. I didn't mean for him to fall," he muttered. Caprio's silence stretched again, long, heavy, suffocating. It wrapped around Dalton until he looked smaller than he ever had, shrinking under a truth he couldn't outrun. Finally, Judge Caprio spoke. Quiet. Controlled. "Officer Dalton, do you understand why silence can be more powerful than anger?" Dalton swallowed. I'm not sure." Caprio leaned forward. "Anger punishes. Silence reveals." The officer blinked, throat tightening. Caprio continued. "When I raise my voice, you resist. When I stay silent, you hear your own." A pin could have dropped and echoed. Dalton's breathing stuttered. Mr. Hawkins wiped a tear. The courtroom seemed frozen in place. Then, just as everyone thought Caprio was about to issue his ruling, he did something that stole the breath from every person in the room. He closed the case file, folded his hands, looked directly at Dalton, and said, "Officer, before I pass judgment, there is someone else who wants to speak to you." The back door opened. A figure stepped inside. Someone no one expected. Someone who made Dalton go pale. The temperature of the courtroom seemed to drop the moment the side door opened again. Every whisper died. Every breath stalled. A woman stepped inside, mid-40s, uniform pressed sharp, her badge catching the light like a blade. Captain Mira Lawson. Dalton's former commanding officer. Dalton's throat tightened visibly. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Judge Caprio gestured calmly. "Captain Lawson, please take the stand." She walked with steady, deliberate steps, steps that said she had nothing to hide, nothing to fear, and nothing left to tolerate. When she sat, her posture was perfect. Her eyes locked onto Dalton's, and he immediately looked away. "Captain Lawson," Caprio said, "you asked to speak before I issue judgment. Proceed." She nodded. "I served as Officer Dalton's supervising officer for 3 years." Her voice was crisp, controlled. "During that time, I documented multiple instances of aggressive conduct, insubordination, and unnecessary escalations." Dalton sprang up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, she has a personal issue with me." Caprio didn't even look at him. "Sit down." The command was soft. It landed like a hammer. Dalton sank into his chair, jaw clenched so tightly his cheek twitched. Captain Lawson continued, eyes sharp. "The incident with Mr. Hawkins? Not an isolated event. It follows a pattern of behavior I attempted, unsuccessfully, to correct." Gasps rippled through the benches. Even the court officers exchanged uneasy glances. Caprio nodded. "Defense may cross-examine." Dalton stood again, but slower this time, as if the air itself resisted him. He walked toward Lawson, shoulders stiff. "Captain," he began, voice strained, "you're using old, irrelevant reports to smear me. Isn't it true you denied my promotion twice?" Lawson didn't blink. "Yes." "Because you failed the conduct review twice." A few people in the back stifled a laugh. Dalton pushed forward. "Isn't it also true that you—" Caprio raised a hand. "Stick to relevant questions, officer." Dalton swallowed. "Fine." He leaned closer to the witness stand, voice low. "Did you witness anything the night of the alleged assault?" Lawson's gaze sharpened. "No." Dalton smirked slightly, too quickly. "So everything you're saying is based on past grievances, correct?" "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "Overruled," Caprio said. "Let her answer." Lawson inhaled slowly. "No, officer. I came because I heard what happened. And because your past grievances look a lot like this present one." Dalton's smirk cracked, splintered, vanished. He took a step back, then forward again, like he was arguing with himself. "You're exaggerating," he said. "I did my job. Firmly. Sometimes the public doesn't like that." Captain Lawson cut him off. "Firmness isn't the issue. Humiliation is. Hostility is. Intimidation is." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you deny shoving Mr. Hawkins?" Dalton hesitated. A beat too long. "He fell because he's old," Dalton blurted. The courtroom exploded in disbelief. Judge Caprio's face didn't move, but the air around him grew heavier. Lawson stared at Dalton like she was watching a man light his own uniform on fire. "Thank you for proving my point." Dalton's breath quickened. Sweat gathered at his hairline. The confidence he walked in with was gone, discarded like a mask that could no longer hold. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Captain Lawson, one final question. In your professional opinion, is Officer Dalton a danger to the public?" Dalton whipped around. "What? No, you can't." "Officer," Caprio warned. The room braced. Lawson didn't hesitate. Not even for a heartbeat. "Yes." A single word. A devastating one. Dalton's knees seemed to wobble. Judge Caprio leaned back, expression unreadable. "I will now consider the testimony presented," he said quietly. "We will take a short recess before I announce my findings." As he stood, the courtroom waited for the usual adjournment tap of his gavel. But instead, before he could lift it, a uniformed deputy rushed through the door, face pale, breathing hard. "Your Honor, there's been an incident involving Mr. Hawkins." The courtroom froze. Dalton's eyes widened. Caprio lowered the gavel slowly. What kind of incident? The deputy swallowed hard. He's gone. Sir, the victim is missing. The courtroom had never felt so small. Even the air seemed tight, coiled, waiting to snap. The deputy's announcement, "The victim is missing," hovered like a dark cloud over every head. It didn't drift. It pressed. Judge Caprio stood behind the bench, hands clasped, face unreadable. "We resume," he said softly, though the softness carried more weight than any shout. Dalton shifted uneasily. He could feel it, the shift, the silent turn. The courtroom was no longer looking at him like an officer under scrutiny. They were looking at him like a suspect. Caprio's eyes moved across the room. "Before we proceed, I need clarity." He turned to the deputy. "When was Mr. Hawkins last seen?" The deputy swallowed. 10 minutes before recess. In the waiting room. Then he was gone. A murmur swept the room, sharp, accusing, electric. Dalton raised his hands defensively. "Don't look at me. I've been here the entire time." But the tone of his voice betrayed something else. Not innocence. Fear. Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Officer Dalton, no one has accused you. Yet." That "yet" landed like a blade. Dalton's mouth tightened. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, in light of the victim's disappearance and the officer's documented history of intimidation, the state requests." Caprio raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. "This court will not indulge speculation," he said. Then, after a beat, "But we will seek truth." Dalton wiped his palms on his uniform pants, pretending they weren't sweating. Caprio looked directly at him. "Officer, did you speak to Mr. Hawkins during recess?" Dalton blinked rapidly. "No. I didn't leave my seat." Captain Lawson, still seated in the witness section, watched him with narrowed eyes. "His seat," she muttered under her breath, "but not his phone." Dalton snapped his head toward her. "What does that mean?" Caprio's eyes sharpened. "Officer Lawson, do you have something to share?" She hesitated. A moment long enough to make the room lean in. "During the recess," she said slowly, "I heard a notification coming from his direction. A voice message. Something like..." She searched her memory. "Meet me outside. Now." Dalton slammed his hand on the table. "Lie. That's a lie." The courtroom recoiled at his outburst. Caprio didn't flinch. "Control yourself." Dalton sat back down, breathing hard through clenched teeth. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, permission to request the officer's phone for verification." Dalton's eyes widened. "You cannot just take my phone." Caprio lowered his gaze, voice soft but final. "Hand it over." A long silence. Dalton stared at him, chest heaving, fingers twitching. Then, with painful slowness, he placed his phone on the prosecutor's table. The prosecutor unlocked the screen under the judge's directive. The courtroom seemed to hold a collective breath. Then, a single unread audio message. Time-stamped during recess. The prosecutor pressed play. A scratchy voice filled the room. "Dalton, I can't do this. Meet me back by the side exit. Please. Before they ask me to speak again." The courtroom erupted. Dalton stood abruptly. "I didn't send that. He must have, he." Caprio's voice cut through the noise. "Order." Slowly, painfully, the courtroom quieted again. Caprio leaned back, studying Dalton. "Officer, this message requires explanation." Dalton shook his head violently. "It's fake. Edited. Something's wrong. Someone's setting me up." Captain Lawson stared at him, her expression shifting from contempt to something colder. "Recognition." "Your Honor," she said quietly, standing, "I know that voice." The room turned to her. "It isn't the victim's." Dalton froze. Caprio's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Then whose voice is it?" Lawson pointed, slowly, accusingly. "His partner." The courtroom gasped. Caprio leaned forward, voice steady, dangerous. "Officer Dalton, where is your partner?" Dalton's lips parted, but no sound came out. And then, the side door creaked open. A silhouette appeared. Someone in uniform. Breathing heavily. Face pale. Eyes locked directly on Dalton. "Your Honor," the figure said, voice shaking, "this is all my fault." The courtroom door shut behind Officer Riker with a hollow echo that ran down the wooden walls like a warning. His uniform was rumpled, his breaths uneven, and sweat gathered at his temples like he'd sprinted here through a storm no one else could see. But it wasn't the sweat that made the courtroom tense. It was the look in his eyes. Broken. Terrified. Cornered. Judge Caprio watched him closely. "Officer Riker," he said, "step forward." Riker didn't walk. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the bench as he moved toward the center of the room. Dalton's face drained of color. "Riker," he hissed under his breath, "don't say anything stupid." That whisper was mistake number one. Caprio heard it. Riker did too. And something in him cracked. He turned toward Dalton, voice trembling. "Stupid. This is your idea of stupid. I can't carry this anymore." Dalton stood abruptly. "Sit down." Riker flinched like the words were a slap. Caprio raised a hand. "Officer Dalton. Not another command in this courtroom." Dalton swallowed hard and slowly sat back down. The silence that followed was suffocating. Caprio's voice broke it. "Officer Riker, what exactly is your fault?" Riker shivered. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mr. Hawkins, he called me." Not Dalton. He wanted to talk. He said he was scared. The room's collective breath tightened. Dalton shook his head violently. "He's lying." "Riker, shut your mouth." "Enough." Caprio didn't shout. But Dalton immediately went silent. Riker continued, voice cracking. "I told Hawkins to meet me at the exit. I didn't think he'd leave the building entirely. I just wanted to calm him down." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you tell the court?" Riker's hands trembled at his sides. "Because Dalton told me not to." A devastating confession. Dalton bolted out of his seat. "This is insane. You're twisting everything." But Riker spun on him, fingers shaking as he pointed. "No. You twisted everything. You always do." Caprio's gavel struck once. Not loud, but enough to freeze the moment. "Officer Riker," Caprio said calmly, "what was Dalton afraid of?" Riker laughed, a brittle, humorless sound that made the hairs on everyone's arms rise. "Everything." His voice trembled. "Losing his badge. Losing control. Losing the story he's been spinning about that night." Dalton's face flushed red. "Riker, stop." But Riker didn't stop. He snapped. "You shoved Hawkins. You screamed at him. You told him he was a nobody and that no one would believe him over a cop." The courtroom gasped as if they heard the shove themselves. Dalton lunged forward. Court officers intercepted him instantly, gripping his arms. His voice shattered into rage. "You traitor! You coward! You were supposed to back me." Riker staggered backwards at the outburst, his breathing rapid, panicked. Then his eyes locked onto Judge Caprio, and the panic melted into a hollow resignation. "Judge," he whispered, "I didn't help him. I watched it happen. I froze. And Hawkins fell because neither of us stopped it." Every word etched guilt deeper into his trembling voice. Caprio watched him with a gaze that wasn't angry, just impossibly sad. "And now," Caprio said softly, "you're ready to tell the full truth?" Riker nodded. Dalton roared. "Riker, don't!" A court officer tightened his hold. Dalton struggled like a trapped animal. Sweat dripped down Riker's forehead as he inhaled sharply, chest rising. "Your Honor, there's more. Something you need to see." He reached slowly into his pocket. Every eye followed the movement. Every muscle in the courtroom tensed. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively. "Sir, keep your hand where I can." But Riker ignored him. He pulled out something small. Black. Rectangular. A USB drive. Dalton's entire face contorted. "Riker." No. Riker placed the drive onto the prosecutor's table with shaking fingers. This is the footage of what really happened. The prosecutor froze. Caprio rose slowly from his seat. Dalton's voice broke into a scream. If you play that, everything is over. And then, before anyone could move, the lights in the courtroom suddenly cut out. Total darkness. A scream echoed through the room. The lights flickered back to life with a harsh, sterile glare that made the room wince. Court officers moved in instantly, checking exits, clearing corners, scanning every inch of the room as if danger were still breathing in the shadows. Judge Caprio stood behind his bench, one hand braced against the wood, posture steady but gaze sharper than ever. Everyone remained seated. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. Dalton, still restrained by two officers, looked shaken for the first time since the hearing began. Riker hunched in his seat, chest rising and falling, eyes wide as if he expected someone to snatch him away in the darkness. The prosecutor stepped forward with a USB drive held carefully between two fingers. Your Honor, the evidence survived the blackout. Caprio nodded once. A storm behind calm eyes. Proceed. A technician hurried to set up the court's monitor. Dalton thrashed against the officer's grip. You can't show that. It's illegally obtained. It's fake. Riker's framing me. Caprio's gavel struck once. Officer Dalton. Another outburst, and I will have you removed entirely. Dalton stopped. Barely. His breath hitched, shoulders trembling with a fury that no longer had anywhere to hide. The monitor blinked awake. Riker closed his eyes. The footage began. A grainy time-stamped video. A streetlight. A sidewalk. Mr. Hawkins standing with his hands partially raised, not aggressive, but frightened. Then Dalton entered the frame. Even without sound, his movements were unmistakable. He stepped into Hawkins' space. A shove. Hawkins stumbling backward, striking the curb. Riker visible in the background. Frozen, doing nothing. The courtroom watched in horrified silence. Dalton's voice cracked. It's taken out of context. He threatened me. Caprio muted him with a single look. The footage ended. A silence heavier than any scream settled over the room. Dalton's head dropped. His chest heaving. His face drained of every color except guilt. Caprio folded his hands and spoke with a slow, deliberate clarity. Officer Dalton, please stand. Dalton rose, but barely, his legs shaking beneath him. Caprio's gaze was steady, almost mournful. Not angry. Disappointed. This court finds your conduct unprofessional, aggressive, and in direct violation of your oath. Dalton swallowed hard, lips trembling. Caprio continued. You used your position to intimidate a civilian. You misled this court. You attempted to manipulate testimony. Each statement landed like a hammer on an already fractured badge. For these reasons, everyone leaned forward. Dalton closed his eyes. Caprio's voice dropped to a near whisper, the kind that carried more weight than fury ever could. This badge does not belong to you anymore. Gasps rippled around the room. Dalton's knees buckled as Caprio delivered the final blow. You are hereby stripped of your badge and suspended pending criminal charges. Dalton shook his head wildly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. No, you can't. I am an officer. That badge is... Caprio cut him off. A badge is a symbol. You dishonored it. Dalton's face crumpled, rage, grief, disbelief all folding into a single devastating collapse. Riker whispered, voice hollow. Frank, I'm sorry. Dalton didn't look at him. The prosecutor stepped forward. Your Honor, with Dalton's suspension confirmed, we now need to... The door slammed open. Everyone turned. A paramedic stood in the doorway, panting, holding a clipboard. Judge Caprio, he said, breathless. We found Mr. Hawkins. The room froze. Caprio straightened. Where is he? The paramedic hesitated. He's alive, but he's not alone. Caprio's brow tightened. What do you mean? The paramedic lifted the clipboard, trembling. He's refusing to return unless he can speak privately with you. He says. He has something to confess. The courtroom erupted. Dalton's eyes widened, not with fear, with hope. The badge lay on Judge Caprio's bench like a piece of evidence still warm from the hands that surrendered it. Its polished surface reflected the courtroom lights, but the shine only emphasized the emptiness around it, an emblem without an owner. The silence that followed its placement felt like a verdict all its own. Officer Daniel Rourke stood rigid, shoulders squared, but the stiffness wasn't discipline, it was fear. Fear wrapped in pride. Fear fighting not to be seen. Caprio watched him for a long moment, eyes steady, unreadable. "Officer Rourke," he finally said, his voice low enough to draw the room's focus like a gravitational pull, "do you understand what placing your badge there truly means?" Rourke swallowed. His throat bobbed once, sharply. "I'm taking responsibility, Your Honor." "Responsibility," Caprio echoed, leaning slightly forward. "Or escape." A flicker, so small most would have missed it, crossed Rourke's face. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled subtly at his sides, fists threatening to form. "I'm not running," Rourke said. "I'm just doing what's right." Caprio shook his head once. Doing what's right and doing what hurts least are rarely the same thing. A whisper moved through the courtroom benches, barely a sound but enough to show how tightly the crowd had been holding its breath. From the corner, the heavy wooden door creaked open. Every head turned. Former Police Chief Robert Rourke entered, his presence filling the space before he ever spoke. Age had bowed his shoulders slightly, but authority still clung to him like an old coat he never stopped wearing. His eyes darted from the badge on the bench to his son standing alone before the judge. He exhaled, slow, wounded. "Danny, what have you done?" Rourke stiffened, but he didn't turn. "Dad, don't. I raised you to be better than this." The older Rourke stepped forward, the weight in his steps a mixture of disappointment and heartbreak. "A badge is not something you surrender because you're cornered. It's something you protect by doing the hard thing." Caprio lifted a hand slightly, not silencing, but guiding. "Chief Rourke, your son has already made his declaration. What matters now is whether he understands why." The former chief faced the judge, then looked at the badge again, long, hard, sorrowful. "He doesn't," he said quietly. "Not yet." Daniel Rourke's composure cracked. For the first time, he looked at his father. Really looked. "I messed up," he said, voice trembling under the veneer. "I snapped. I lost it with that veteran. I know. But I'm trying to fix it." "You can't fix what you haven't faced," the chief said. The room stilled again. Judge Caprio leaned back, letting the emotional weight settle over everyone. His gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding sharpened by decades on the bench. "Officer Rourke," he said, "this court isn't interested in the badge you placed here." He tapped the metal gently with a knuckle. "We're interested in the man who walked away from it." Rourke's breath hitched. Caprio continued, "Before this court decides your future, I need to hear, clearly, honestly, what that moment meant. Was it remorse? Shame? A plea for help? Or a maneuver to control the narrative before the narrative controls you?" Rourke opened his mouth, but no words came. His father stepped closer, voice barely more than a whisper. "Son, tell him the truth." Daniel looked between the badge, the judge, and the father who suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Caprio watched his indecision tightening like a rope. Then he said, quiet, devastating, "Because if you don't speak the truth today, this badge won't be the only thing left behind." The room froze. Rourke's face drained of color. And the chapter ends as he lifts his eyes toward Caprio, ready to speak or to break.